Here's a really quick rough sketch that I did of a white building that I'm going to be using to show you the color of shadows. So let's say the sky is a blue, and I'm just quickly roughing it in, as you can see, like this. And the shadows, therefore, whether on the ground, being the cast shadow, or the form shadow, which is this part of the form or this part of the form. It's also referred to sometimes as the conjoined shadow. It is the shadow that occurs on the form itself. So the blue of the sky is reflected into the cast shadow. So I'm adding that blue here, as you can see, into the cast shadow. And I need to darken it and lower its intensity or saturation. And it needs to be darker than that. The cast shadow is usually darker than the conjoined or form shadow. I made the shadow a little too gray, so I'm going to add a little more of the blue hue, increase the saturation somewhat, and then add blue to the side of the building here, like this. And also to the top of the roof. And it's a little too gray. Put a little more saturated color in there. And matter of fact, the value has to be raised even more for the roof, since that part of the form is receiving more light, since it's angled toward the sky more than this part of the form. So this is the vertical plane, and vertical planes of forms also receive the reflected light of the sky. If the sky is blue, then the vertical planes on the form will receive that blue reflected light, as well as the cast shadows. The building is white, so the blue reflected light is falling on a white form. Therefore, the blue of the sky is very apparent within the shadows, because it is not mixing with another color on the form. If the building were orange, that blue of the sky would mix with the orange local color of the building, and would therefore make the blue not as apparent as it is now on a white form. I'm going to paint the building orange to show you what it would look like. And by the way, I increased the saturation of these colors on the color wheel. They were a bit too dull and not accurate enough. Now, they're more accurate according to what the traditional color wheel circle looks like. It's referred to as the traditional color wheel. There are various color wheels like the Munsell color wheel and others, but what I'm using here is called the traditional color wheel. Now I'll add orange to the building. Very quick indication here of orange. And you can see that the shadow remains blue. It's not really mixing with the orange color. If you're working with a form that has a color like the orange and it's not white, then this kind of representation of the blue shadow on the form that has a color is not realistic, because there's going to be a mixing that occurs between the color of the form and the blue color reflected from the sky into the shadow. Unless you have a white form. If you have a white form like this, then there's no mixing of colors that occurs, and you can have a blue shadow like this. But if there is a color on the form, then there's going to be a mixture that occurs. So the shadow will have a blue, but it's not going to be as noticeable as a form that is white, like this. So here I'm going to add some blue to this orange that I placed in the shadow, and you can see what happens. The orange color is grayed or reduced in intensity because when you mix blue and orange together, they neutralize each other. You get a grayed color. And depending on the proportions of the colors will determine whether it's a grayed blue or a grayed orange, or if you get the mixture just right of equal proportions, then you end up with a neutral gray. Now, the color of the shadow, as I mentioned earlier, if you remember, with the cube, cannot be a color that is totally different from the local color of the object seen within the light. So, realistically, you can't have a blue shadow like this on an orange colored form, unless you want to break the rule for some reason and you want a more imaginative appearance, not so much a realistic appearance, but a more imaginative one. And you can do that, but it's not going to look true to life. So here I'm adding some more blue and a little more of the orange color, graying it, reducing its value also. Needs to be darker. And a little more orange in there. But then also there's that shift in color that occurs, if you remember what I talked about. So here's the orange on the color wheel, and it's going to drop down below to the color which is red-orange. So some of that red-orange is going to be within the shadow color as well. So I'll add that. And now this is a more true-to-life depiction of what a shadow color would look like on a form that has an orange local color to it. Now some traces of the blue reflected color of the sky can still be seen within the orange shadow. So I could do something like this, where just a little bit of that blue sky can still be seen within the orange shadow. But it's not like this, where the entire shadow becomes blue. Now let's say I have a green sky. Let's say you're doing a science fiction illustration, and it takes place on a different planet where the sky isn't blue, it's green. So I'm going to add a green sky, just rough it in. So instead of having blue shadows on the form, in this case, you'd have, of course, green shadows. The green of the sky is being reflected into the shadows. And of course I have to darken that green and move it a bit toward the blue-green. So I'm going to move this slider up a little bit toward the blue-green. Remember, there's a color shift that occurs. And you can easily create that color shift with the color picker by just moving the color slider here in the direction of the color that is either below or above the local color of the object on the color wheel. So you don't have to do this where you select the green, let's say, and because that green is going to be in shadow, you add some of the blue-green to that green like this, and you get that color. You don't have to do that. You can go to the color picker, select your green, but then be sure to move the color slider toward the blue-green a little bit, adding a little of that blue-green to the green, and then you wind up with the correct color for the shadow. Now back again to the blue sky. This time the color of the light source is going to be red. That means that the cast shadows as well as the form shadows are going to be the complementary color of the light source. So the complementary color to red is green. That means that I'm going to make the side of the building here green, and this color is apparent because the building is white. And then the ground where the cast shadow is also green. Most of the green actually occurs within the cast shadow. But of course there's green to a lesser extent within the form shadow as well. Now I'm just doing this really quick, as you can see, just to get this idea across to you, that the color of the cast shadow as well as the form shadow is the complementary color of the light source. So if the light source is red, the shadow is going to be green. If the light source is green, the shadow is going to be red. If the light source is yellow, the shadow is going to be violet. And this color will be most apparent on a white form, as I've been pointing out to you. As soon as you add color to the form, so let's say a blue, if I add this blue, then that green is going to mix with the blue. So I get a blue-green, but it's going to lean more toward the blue. The green is just going to be to a much less degree within the blue shadow. It's just going to be slightly tinged with the green. So the cast shadow here is receiving the reflected light of the sky, and it's blue, but since there is also green within the shadow due to the red light source, there is going to be a mixture of the green with the blue. So I'm going to darken that shadow, that cast shadow, like this. That's a little too dark. And now, as you can see, I'm just doing this real quick just to get this idea across to you. So while the form shadow here needs to be blue, since the local color of the building is blue, it also needs to have some of the complementary color of the light source. So I need to add a little bit of the green, just a touch of it. It's just that blue is just tinged with that green. The idea is that within the shadow there is also some of the complementary color of the light source. You also, however, have to remember that there is a shift in color within the shadow toward the color below it on the color wheel, as I've been pointing out to you. So this blue on the color wheel would have a bit of the blue-violet within it. I made an additional change on the color wheel. See this color right here? This is the blue-violet. And it didn't look blue-violet enough. It looked too much like the violet, so I added some more blue to it. And now it's more accurate. Now back to the building. This time the light source is going to be a yellow color. Therefore, on a white form such as this white building, the shadows are going to be the complementary color of the yellow, which is, of course, violet. Whatever the color of the light source is, the shadow color will be the complementary color of that color of the light source. And then, of course, the cast shadow as well is a violet, and I'm just roughing these colors in. They're not that accurate. They need to be reduced in their intensity and made a bit lighter in value. As you can see, I'm doing this very quick. So it would be something like this. Yellow light, violet shadows. But that's on a white form. Remember, if the form has a color, the color of the complementary color of the light source isn't going to be as apparent as it is on a white form. And the more intense the yellow light source is, that is, the more yellow that can be seen within the yellow light source, the more saturated the color of the shadow is going to be. Now let's say instead of a yellow light, there's an orange light. That would mean that the color of the shadow is going to be blue, because blue is the complementary color of orange. So I'll reduce the value, and also a color shift needs to occur, and it's going to be toward the blue violet. So a little bit of that blue violet is within the blue, just a touch of the blue violet, just tinges it slightly. And I think I'll make the value a bit lighter. And then the roof. And of course the cast shadow, which is darker than the form shadow. So something like this. It's rough, but you get the idea. Now also, of course, that part of the form, the building in this case, that is in the light is going to be colored by that colored light source. So the white building is going to be tinged with the orange color of the light source, like that. And if it's a strong colored light source, that white building is going to receive more of the color of the light source, like this. So in the case of the violet shadow and the yellow light source, that white building, of course, will become yellow looking. Now let's say the building is actually yellow-orange. The entire building has the local color of yellow-orange. So I'm going to add the yellow-orange here, just really quick. And that means that the violet shadow is no longer going to be as apparent as it is now. And there's going to be that shift or drop in color on the color wheel from yellow-orange to orange. Or at least some of the orange will be within the yellow-orange. So I need to go to the color picker and then use my color slider and move the color a bit toward the orange, like that, and reduce its value and intensity. So maybe something like this. Now, this doesn't mean that there is no violet color whatsoever within this orange shadow color, or yellow-orange shadow color. Just a little bit, a slight tinge of the violet would be within that shadow. So I'll add just a little bit of the violet. And down here as well on the vertical plane. And then the cast shadow. Now if I wanted to, I could add more of the violet color to the cast shadow, since it is the cast shadow that actually receives more of the complementary color of the light source than the form shadow does. So you can actually see more of that complementary color within the cast shadow. And if the ground plane has a color, then that cast shadow color is going to mix with the color of the ground color. So maybe I'll add a red-orange color to the ground, gray it a little bit, doing this very quick and very rough, as you can see. So now, let's say some of that blue is being reflected into the shadow, the blue of the sky. So a little bit of that blue I'm going to add to the roof. Those planes that are further up on the form will receive more of the reflected light coming from above, such as the sky, while those planes on a form that are further down are going to receive more of the color of the ground, or those colors that are further down on the form. So therefore, some of this red-orange color is going to be reflected into the shadow here, and I can add it over here on this side, adding some color to that shadow. Let's say I had a green tree as well, and just quickly rough in a green tree over here. That would mean that that green is going to be reflected into the shadow. And let me just quickly add a trunk. So I'll pick up some of that green and then add that to the shadow on the roof, as well as here on the side or the vertical plane of the building. You can see how the shadow is gaining all these different colors due to the reflected light from all these other sources. Now the cast shadow here could have more of the violet in it like that, or you could add the blue of the sky being reflected into that cast shadow like this. And the cast shadows usually have that blue sky color within them if the sky is blue. So something like this. Now the blue could also occur within the vertical forms or planes of the form, but usually it's those planes that are further up on the form, closer to the sky, the source of the blue reflected light. But you see in many paintings where the artist also adds blue to the vertical planes, like this. And I could tighten it up a little bit, but I don't want to spend too much time on this. Now you also need to consider the fact that some of the color of the light source is going to appear on the form that is facing into the light. So therefore this yellow-orange is going to appear a little bit more yellow. A little more, it's still going to be yellow-orange, but it's going to lean a bit more toward the yellow. It's going to have a little more yellow in it, in other words, because the light source is yellow. That yellow is mixing with the yellow-orange and adding a bit more yellow to the yellow-orange. So all these things you need to take into consideration. Now just in this little rough color sketch, you can see the many different colors that can occur within the shadow due to all these different sources that reflect their color into the shadows. So you can get quite a bit of color variety within shadows. You can make them really interesting looking. There are going to be warmer and cooler colors within a shadow because of the warmer and cooler colors that are being reflected into the shadows. So the warm color of the ground is being reflected into the cool shadow here. So that warms that shadow. Then you have the cool color of the sky, which is being reflected into the warm shadow, cooling the shadow. So some parts of the shadow can be warmer, other parts cooler, depending on the color that is being reflected into the shadow. And this helps to add vibrancy and excitement of color to a shadow. And now I want to go over what I showed you as to what the various colors are that can be found within a shadow, starting with an orange color. Let's say that is the color that is to appear in shadow. So you need to reduce its intensity. Now this applies mostly to working with actual paint, because if you're using Photoshop, you just go to the color picker and then you just select the correct color by using the little circle here and going to the color that you think is going to be the right one for the shadow. But if you're working with paint, you need to know what colors to add to that color to make it a shadow color. So, for example, the intensity or saturation of this color needs to be reduced, and therefore I'm going to add some complementary color, and I'll add that over here, which is going to be the blue, and then I'll add some of that blue to the orange color, thereby reducing its intensity somewhat. So blue is one of the colors added, and there is also blue within all of the shadows that are outside with a blue sky, because some of that blue sky, some of the color of the atmosphere, in other words, is being reflected into shadows. So all shadows will contain some blue within them. In addition, there is the color shift that occurs. So I'm going to add the red-orange here, which some of that is added to this orange shadow color, like that, where that shift in color occurs, or that shift in hue. Remember, the hue is the name of the color. It refers to the attribute of that color. In addition, there may be some of the complementary color of the light source. So if the light source is yellow, there's going to be a little bit of the violet within that color as well. So I'll add just a little of that violet color, lighten the value, like this. Not too much. I don't want it to look violet. It's just that a little bit of that is in the color, and it helps to cool down the color. And there you have it. That's the shadow color. And here are the components of that shadow color. So remember, if you want to reduce the intensity of the color, use the complementary color. Then there's that shift in color toward the color below the color that is being used in the shadow on the color wheel. And then some of the complementary color of the shadow may also appear within the shadow itself. In addition, remember that shadows outdoors with a blue sky have some of that blue colored atmosphere within them. Here I mentioned that you can use the complementary color of the local color to reduce its intensity for the color of the shadow. But you can also reduce the intensity to a lesser degree by using the near complement color added to the local color, which in this case happens to be orange, as you know. So I could use, instead of the blue, I could use blue-green, which is right here on the color wheel, to reduce the intensity of orange. So let me pick up the orange from the color wheel, and here it is without it having been grayed. And then I'll add some of that blue-green, reduce the value a little bit to it like this. And you can see that the intensity or saturation of the orange is also reduced this way by using a near complement. So you can have the near complement within the local color for the shadow color instead of the complementary color. And you can get a richer looking shadow color that way if you use the near complementary color. But be warned that the near complementary color can also change the hue of the local color. If you look at this color in comparison to this one, you can see that this one here, in which I use the near complementary, leans a little more toward the yellow-orange rather than the orange color. Moving right along now to this rough color sketch that I did, and I just want to quickly add a different color, and I'm going to use, let's say, a yellow light source, and then remember what I showed you with the building. Let's say that this spacecraft is not green but rather a white color, so just quickly add white here, and that means that the shadow, as you know, will then appear violet. So the violet color is apparent, but remember, it's only because the spacecraft is white. Otherwise, you wouldn't see a violet shadow like this. And I'll add a violet shadow over here, and another one over there, here, like this. Just roughing it in real quick. Now, you can see this is very rough, but it's enough to show you what happens with a yellow light source falling on a white object, just as I showed you with the building and the cube. The white is changed to a yellow because the light source is yellow, and the shadow becomes a violet, the complementary color to the yellow light source. Then I can add more color variety by adding some of the reflected light from the blue sky into the shadow right there, like this. And then also some of the orange color on the ground is reflected into the lower part of the spacecraft like this. So the upper part receives the blue of the sky, while the lower part receives the color of the ground. Now I'm going to change the color. Instead of having a white form that is colored by the color of the light source, I'm going to start out with the local color blue for this spacecraft. So I'll just roughly sketch in the blue, keeping everything rough and doing it fast so that I can quickly get this knowledge across to you. Everything's done in real time, as you can see. So I can't tighten things up and make things look really nice. That's not what is important right now. What's important is what I'm telling you about the color of shadows. So here's this local color of blue in the light, and now I'm going to add blue to the shadow, because since the color is blue in the light, the color is also going to be blue in the shadow, but there's going to be a shift of color, as you know, and I'm going to shift that color with the color slider here toward the blue-violet. It's not going to be blue-violet, but there's going to be some blue-violet within that blue color. And I have to shift it a little more toward the blue-violet, like this, and maybe gray it a little more. And then the color in the light is a little too blue-green, so I have to change that because it mixed with the yellow that was there. Go over this color like that, changing it to more of a blue, and then making it lighter toward that part of the form that is receiving more light. And then there's a shift in the color toward the blue-green a little bit. See, that part is lighter because it's closer to the light source. Now, this isn't 100% accurate because, as you can see, I'm doing this very quick. And I have to go back to the shadow color. It's a little too blue-violet. Make some changes here. I'm getting a lot of color variety, as you can see, within that shadow color. See, I have to shift the color a little more toward the blue-violet. And then I need some darker blue. By adding some darker lines and shapes, a feeling of a transparent shadow results. Now, I may have gone a little too light in value for the shadow color. See, these adjustments have to be made, and it takes time. And then I'm going to add the core shadow. And the shadow needs some darks, some dark accents to give that feeling of a transparent shadow. You see how the shadow begins to look more transparent by adding these dark accents like this? Now, the color in the light is still not right. I think I'm going to have to lower the value on that color. So, something like this. The color in the shadow needs some adjusting. Begin to take shape. Now I need to change the blue a little bit, because if you remember, the color of the light source is going to mix with the local color of the form somewhat. So since the light source here is yellow and the local color is blue, when you mix yellow and blue together, you get green. But of course, the local color is not going to turn to green. It's just going to have a little bit of that yellow in it, which turns it a little toward the blue-green. So I'm going to add a little bit of the yellow to the blue, like this. But I can also do the same thing by selecting the blue, going to the color picker, and then moving the color slider toward the blue, thereby changing the blue a little toward the blue-green. And I'll make the value lighter as well, since this part of the form is closer to the light, is receiving more light, and therefore it becomes lighter in value. And you can see the change in hue that is occurring because of that yellow being added to the blue. But right here, this is where the halftone is, and that's where you see the local color, the true color of the form. Enlarged it a little bit, get a nice close-up view. And a little bit of light is being added here toward this part of the form up here. Within the shadow here, you can see little bits of violet here and there. And that's, as you know, because the light source here is yellow, and the complementary color of yellow is violet. So this helps to add even more color variety to the shadow by having a little bit of that violet occurring within the blue shadow. So it's important to add that additional complementary color of the light source to get more variety into the color of the shadow and make that shadow more interesting. Here you see that I've carried this rough color sketch a bit further, refined it a little bit more, but it's still rather rough. It's not a finished painting. But what I want to show you now is the highlights that will be added. So I'm going to, first of all, select a more saturated color, and I'm going to move the color slider a bit more toward the green, something like that maybe, and then I'll add that right there. That's the more saturated part of the highlight, and also here, here, and right there as well. Where planes meet, that's where you'll find a highlight. So there's a plane right here, and then there's this top plane. So they meet right there, and that's where the highlight occurs. And then other various places. Every form has a highlight. The smaller forms have their own highlights, just as the larger forms have highlights. And a highlight up here, also right there. And along this cut line. And now I'll go back to the color picker and move this color slider even further toward the green, and then add a lot of white, which is the lightest part of the highlight. And I'll add that right there. It's a specular highlight. And you get the feeling of a metal texture, hard metal texture, due to this specular highlight. I think what this spacecraft needs is a strong color accent. Now, when you add a color accent, it usually should be a contrasting hue, but not necessarily always. It could be the same hue, but more saturated than the local color of the form. But in this case, since I have a lot of blue, I need something to relieve all of that blue, and a contrasting hue added, such as red, for example, can help to give some relief to all of this blue. And it will add quite a punch to the image, and I'm going to add that red right here. I'm not going to repeat it anywhere else. Adding an accent like this in just one spot, which is a contrasting hue, can add a lot of interest and give that extra punch to the image that the image may need. And also, it helps to draw the eye of the viewer here. Some of the yellow-orange in background can be added to the shadow, warming up certain parts of the shadow. So maybe right there, that's a little too light in value. Let's see what this looks like. That's good, just a little bit like that. Adds a warmer color to the cooler shadow, helps to add interest through temperature contrast. And then I have the warmer color down here that is reflected from the orange color of the ground into the lower part of the spacecraft. Now I could add some really dark accents into the cast shadow to give a greater feeling of a transparent shadow. And the fact that I've added these darks here in the shadow area of the spacecraft, and these dark lines that you see here, they help to give a greater feeling of transparency to the shadow. Just as these darks that I just added here, these really dark values, they are little stones that are seen within the shadow that help to give a feeling of a more transparent looking shadow. So these darks that you add into the shadow are very important because they help to give a feeling of transparency to the shadow. The cast shadow contains some of the complementary color of this yellow light source. So I could add a little bit of violet to that shadow color, cooling it a little bit, just a little here and there. Or what I could do is add a violet shadow, a violet cast shadow. Really exaggerate that color of the cast shadow so that it looks more like the complementary color of the yellow light source. So I could do something like this, for example. So there you have it. Now I have a violet cast shadow because it's the complementary color of the yellow light source. And I think I need to add a little bit of violet into this blue shadow because I seem to have lost some of that violet color that was there before. So I can add little spots of violet here and there because I know that the shadow to a yellow colored light source is violet. So now I have even more color variety within this shadow here. It's not just one dull, dirty or muddy looking blue color like this. There are all sorts of color variations within a color shadow, which adds a lot of interest to a shadow. I added some dark accents within the violet cast shadow to help give a greater feeling of transparency to that shadow. And now I'm adding some grass texture, as you can see, like this, just a few strokes here and there. made a change here to the leg, and I think I'll do the same for this other leg here. That's about as far as I'm going to take this rough color sketch.